your heart and let it all in. This is where dreams were meant to begin. Open your heart and let it all in. Yeah. The love this world needs starts from within. I got this feeling I can't lose, and every time that I'm with you, it's amazing. You got me soaring, and your love is blessing my soul. You make me feel like I can't lose. In your eyes, I'm unstoppable. It's a blessing how your loving is wrapped around my soul. Open your heart and let it all in. Ooh, this is where dreams were meant to begin.
The road is long, with many a winding turn, that leads us to who knows where. Who knows where? But I am strong enough to carry him. He ain't heavy. He's my brother. So on we'll go. His welfare's my concern. No burden is he to bear. Oh, we'll get there. For I know he will not encumber me. He ain't heavy. He's my brother. Yes, he is. If I'm laden at all, I'm laden with sadness that everyone's heart is not filled with gladness of love for one another. It's a long, hard road from which there is no return while we're on our way to there. Why not share and the load doesn't weigh me down at all. No, he ain't heavy. He's my brother. Yes, it is. He ain't heavy. He's my brother. He's my brother.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much to singer, songwriter, and fellow Baha'i Kristin Barnes for bringing her voice to the program tonight. That was just an amazing start to tonight's program. Thank you. My name is Payam Zamani, and I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the website BahaiTeachings.org. And this is Baha'i Teachings Live. And if you haven't heard of the Baha'i Faith before, it is the world's newest independent global belief system. It teaches the oneness of God, the unity of humanity, and the harmony of all religions. So when this is over, feel free to head to BahaiTeachings.org so you can read the perspectives of Baha'is about those topics and many more, including how social justice, how social change starts in our communities, finding economic solutions that work for everyone, and addressing racism, America's most challenging issue. This brings us to today's topic. America, we need to talk about racism. And before I get too much into it, let me please introduce our panelists for tonight's program. So if you could please turn on your cameras and I will go ahead and introduce each one of you. The first is Liz Dwyer. Liz, maybe you can just wave. Liz is the managing editor and director of operations for BahaiTeachings.org. Prior to joining Baha'i Teachings, Liz served as the communications director for 826 National, and along with freelancing for various national print and digital outlets, Liz worked as the managing editor of Shondaland.com, worked as the education and culture editor for Take Part, the digital arm of Participant Media, and as the education editor at Good Magazine. Then we have Eric Dozier. There's Eric. Eric is a cultural activist, a musician, and I had to look up this word. I still don't know how to pronounce it. It means a musician. It goes from one place to another. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. A blues preacher who uses music to engage communities in dialogue about racism. He's a graduate of Duke University and Duke Divinity School and is currently pursuing a doctorate at the University of Tasmania, researching Black gospel music performed in multicultural context as a pathway to racial justice. He's on a mission to show the world what community sounds like. And if you haven't heard Eric sing, you are missing a lot. You absolutely should look him up. Then we have Makeena Rivers. Makeena is a recent graduate from Columbia School of Social Work, where she focused on race, incarceration, education, and class. Before that, she studied psychology and sociology at Emory University. She's passionate about seeking justice and healing through building creatively. We got Michael O'Neill. Michael has been a Savannah resident for 46 years. Michael is a founder of and has been the chief steward of a grassroots, parent and family-driven community-based program in Savannah since 1999. The mission of the program is to create a climate of continuous learning for the participants. The program took on the name Parent University, and Michael now serves as the executive director. Parent University and its new component, Early Learning College, have served thousands of parents and their families over 2 decades. Then we have Marjan Yavari. Marjan is a resident of Atlanta and is developing a commercial building complex devoted to community building. And the focus of this building will be race amity, community building, justice and healing, and a space for junior youth empowerment programs. The building is adjacent to the historical Baha'i Center on Edgewood Avenue. Edgewood is also home of the Martin Luther King Center and is the birthplace of Dr. King. The Baha'i Center was built in 1948 for the purpose of interracial gatherings for Baha'is during the Jim Crow era, where safe spaces for interracial gatherings were scarce. We have PJ Andrews. PJ works at the US Baha'i Office of Public Affairs based in Washington, D.C., where he co-coordinates the office's collaboration with individuals, organizations, and agencies in the US engaged in public discourses and policy advocacy directed toward racial justice and racial unity. We have Anthony Outler. Anthony is a native of Atlanta, Georgia. He was raised in the Baptist church and became a Baha'i at the age of 16. He has worked in the field of education for the past 17 years, serving as a classroom teacher, social and emotional learning coach, and he is currently a middle school assistant principal in DeKalb County, Georgia. Last but not least, we have Leili Towfigh. Leili is an artist, educational technologist, and anti-racism facilitator for the past 25 years. And I also would like to remind our viewers that throughout the program, please feel free to post questions and or comments. And as time permits, we will be happy to share them with the panel and discuss those as well. So let's start our conversation tonight. Shoghi Effendi, who was the guardian of the Baha'i faith from 1921 to 1957, in 1938 sent a letter to the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. This was a significant letter, and it is treated as a book called The Advent of Divine Justice. This book lays out the Baha'i understanding of the unique spiritual destiny that America has. The following quote from The Advent of Divine Justice provides a framework for addressing the issue of race in America, and Anthony will share that with us.
All right, good evening, everyone. The quotation reads, "Let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Let the Negroes, through a corresponding effort on their part, show by every means in their power the warmth of their response, their readiness to forget the past, and their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still linger in their hearts and minds. Let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. Let neither think that they can wait confidently for the solution of this problem until the initiative has been taken and the favorable circumstances created by agencies that stand outside the orbit of their faith. Let neither think that anything short of genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country."
Thank you so much, Anthony. I really appreciate it. Shoaib Effendi referred to racism as America's most challenging issue. And this letter was written almost 100 years ago or 90 years ago. And so some of the words used represent the time when the letter was written. But this clearly provides a framework that Baha'is use as we think about the issue of race. So now let's go to our panelists. And the question that I have is, and I would like to start off by asking this question from Michael, if that's okay. How does knowing this letter and this framework change the way you talk about racism?
Well, for me, the part that you were referring to, where it was being described what each group should do. You know, I found that the first time I read it very challenging. Not sure I could even attempt to do that. But I also looked at what was asked of whites, and I could see where that would be challenging as well. And so, to me, what it set up to me is that I had to create an environment where we could work together over a period of time and work things out and develop a relationship that could get us over those initial angst of doing the kind of things we had to do to rectify the situation.
Thank you. Makeena, would you like to add to that?
Sure. So the thing that really stands out to me this time around listening to the passage is this idea of persistence. And I feel like this is in the wake of like seeing a lot of people try to jump to immediate action in the hopes that like people are like very caught up in this emotionality of the inertia that's happening in this moment, this resurgence of civil rights, whatever someone might call it. And so this idea of persistence has been like on my mind. And I think it's kind of tied to like a reaction that I'm processing where I feel like, okay, like we're all energetic about this in this moment, but like, what does this mean now in 6 months or when the headlines change? Or like, how do we actually make it so that this energy is something that people keep? So yeah, just listening to it that time around, that's what I kind of was like, that's what caught my ear. I was like, right, persistence, it's going to take a while, challenging. Like it's not something you can do a quick fix for.
That's really good point. So this is not something that comes and goes. It has to be there. It's an ongoing campaign. Eric, do you want to add to that?
Yes. You know, I remember the first time I heard that passage, and that was about 25 years ago when I became a Baha'i. And, you know, I remember being very, very moved by the words of Shoaib Effendi and appreciated all that the Baha'i faith had to say about the nobility of humanity, but also the role and station of that Black Baha'is would play. But even more impressed by the fact that that inside the scripture of the Baha'i faith, that in our scripture, it was calling white people to do this as well. And I think that the fact that for us, it is scripture, to me, that equates that to me that it is not optional. And so that was the thing that kind of stood out to me the first time I heard that passage. And I guess I still kind of think like that. You know, I'm glad that it is a part of our scripture, so no one can really get away from it.
Thank you. Anthony.
You know, kind of piggybacking off what Eric was saying is this, you know, it's part of our scripture. And as Baha'i, you know, this is, you know, what we accept as the sovereign truth, and we submit to that scripture. But in so doing, you know, Baha'u'llah teaches us to always, you know, ask questions and think critically and investigate truth independently. And so in reading this quotation, you know, there's a part in there when I first read this, and even it took me a while to kind of come to grips with it, particularly the part of the quotation that where the Guardian says, forget the past. And so, you know, when I look at that piece of the quotation, particularly, just to give you a brief background, I was, as a youth, my parents, kind of put me in these circles of cultural empowerment, Black cultural empowerment. And one of the things that we know as it relates to the empowerment, cultural empowerment of Black people, is having an understanding of our history, an understanding of, what happened to us in 1619 and 400 years thereafter. And so it took me a while, but I was able to come to grips with this because our faith in the Baha'i writings, is full of this concept of remembrance, right? Remembrance can be found throughout our writings. And Baha'u'llah, who's the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, in one of his most sacred tablets called the Tablet of Ahmad, really helped me to put this whole idea into perspective. One of the lines in the Tablet of Ahmad says, and this is Baha'u'llah talking, he says, "Remember my days during thy days." So he's asking us to remember, right? Now, and then he says, "and my distress and banishment in this remote prison." Baha'u'llah spent over 40 years of his life in prison and in exile at the hands of religious clerics in the Middle East and fanatics. And so he's telling us, Baha'u'llah was in prison with chains on his neck, being beaten and forced to walk in snow, and all these horrible things that was happening to him. And in that tablet, he asked us to remember my days during thy days. But it doesn't stop there with remembrance. He says, then there's another part to that. He says, "Remember my days during thy days and my distress and banishment in this remote prison." Then he said, "Be thou so steadfast in my love that thy heart shall not waver." So what this means is that the remembrance, the purpose of the remembrance was for us to be steadfast in the cause of righteousness, in the cause of establishing oneness on the planet and establishing justice, right? And so when I look at that and contextualize it within my experience, our experience of Black people, when we remember the suffering of our ancestors, remember their days during our days and their distress and banishment and the oppression that continues, right? So that our heart will be unwavering. Then the next part of that says, "Even if the swords of the enemies rain down upon thee, and all the heavens and the earth arise against thee." And so when we look at the spirit of Black people, when the swords of the enemies have rained down upon us in 1619, the swords of the enemy rained down on Emmett Till, the swords of the enemies rained down on Tamir Rice, and all the other folk, George Floyd, the swords of the enemy is raining down upon us. But when we remember our ancestors and we remember the spirit of resilience, we remember the spirit of struggle, our heart will remain unwavering as we continue this work for social justice. And so I don't necessarily, it helped me to reconcile this whole idea of forgetting. I think what the gardening was trying to help us to understand is, remember, but don't stop there, right? Don't wallow in that space. Contextualize that experience and that struggle within the obligation that you have to continue to fight for liberation that our ancestors started years ago. So I just wanted to help, just put that in perspective.
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. That phenomenal. That was really amazing. And so let me also actually, before we go on to the next question, I wanted to actually get Leili Towfigh's also perspective on this.
I wanted to say something connected to what Anthony just said about forgetting. I can't comment on the responsibilities for Black folks, and I won't, because I have to focus on my path. But I think that there's a concomitant responsibility for white people, which is, how can Black folks forget the past if white folks don't know what it is? And that responsibility to educate ourselves and to be as focused and urgent and life and death about this issue as our brothers and sisters are, is, I think, it's a prerequisite. If anybody were ever to be able to forget the past, I think that could only happen if white people knew what that was.
Yeah. And Leili, I'm so glad you bring this up, because I'm an immigrant, and I think that so many immigrants often they look at the issue of race in America and they feel like, well, I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't here. It wasn't my ancestors. And the fact is, we're benefiting from a system that was very much in an unjust way was built, and we're building our American dream based on that system. So we're an accomplice unless we are also playing our part as those privileged individuals.
And Shoghi Effendi makes that very clear. It's
Yes.
unequivocal for people who are Baha'is. He says earlier from that passage, he says, all who stand identified with the faith must participate and lend their assistance.
That's
and
right.
he says that racial prejudice has attacked the whole structure of American society for well nigh a century in 1938. So, you know, there's no argument. And I think it changes the outlook. You can't argue with it. If you are Baha'i, if you believe what Baha'u'llah says, then you must participate, and you must change and transform and educate yourself. No getting out of it.
And that's true. And frankly, even if it doesn't matter if you're Baha'is or not, I mean, we live in a society that the ills of the society affects us all. Addressing the issue of racism in this country, I don't think it only benefits our Black brothers and sisters. It benefits us all. It will be a source of strength for all of us. So let me go on to the next one. And the question really is that, knowing this framework that Shoghi Effendi provides us with, how does it affect our day-to-day priorities and the choices we make in our personal lives, our professional lives, and the time we spent in our community, however you want to define that community? And Liz, maybe we can go to you.
Sure. I mean, first off, I just want to acknowledge that we are having this conversation on the day of George Floyd's homegoing. And, you know, watching that service earlier today, I was really struck by when it says, you know, the power of the warmth of our response, and knowing that Baha'u'llah talks so often about the inherent nobility of people and refers to African Americans as being the pupil of the eye, which means that we have the ability to see, you know, clearly. And knowing that these two quotations are set up in a framework that is described as essential, that without this we cannot achieve peace in the United States, right? And therefore the globe. Like if we don't do these things, we actually are holding back world peace. So when I think about all of the professional decisions that I have made throughout my life, I came to Los Angeles as a school teacher, teaching in Compton. And I actually tried to live in Compton because I felt that it was important to live where you taught. I had three days to find a place to live, couldn't find an apartment because it's all mostly small houses. So I made the decision to do my grocery shopping in Compton, to go to the library in Compton. Every single time someone tried to say something about students in Compton, I was the fiercest advocate, because it's like, you actually don't know, you know, what you're talking about. I saw it as my sacred responsibility to amplify the voices and the experiences of people in that community. When I became a journalist, that moved to story selection. You make choices every day about what are you going to cover? How are you going to report it? Who are your sources going to be? What is the angle that you're going to take? How are you going to depict African Americans in your story? And those are very deliberate choices. And it's oftentimes challenging when you're in a newsroom, and this is a broader conversation that media has that is not diverse. So if you have a white editor-in-chief who does not have this framework in mind, and is looking at African Americans through the lens of the stereotypes, the racially based stereotypes that we know are all too common, it can be really challenging and difficult. And I have made professional decisions to either not take positions, or to walk away from roles, or to go to bat for things that I know I believe in, because spiritually I know it's not correct to report a story in that way or whatnot. It's about where I live. I made a choice to live and send my children to public schools here in Los Angeles. I sent my sons to elementary school that was 99.9% Title I kids, for a reason, because I did not feel that it was appropriate for me to send my children out of a neighborhood and assumed that there was something that my kids deserved that other kids in that neighborhood did not deserve. And that I needed to be a part of the community, stand up and advocate for people in that way. So all that to say that, it's, in thinking about this and thinking about that crowd that I watched, there was a point in the service today of that funeral where Reverend Al Sharpton asked all the parents to stand. And there was Trayvon Martin's mama standing up there, Ahmaud Arbery's family standing up there. And so recognizing that it's personal for me, it's a spiritual thing. It is also personal because Black folks, we know this is no joke for us. We know that there are deadly consequences for us. And I think America, a few minutes before this started, I drove down on Sunset Boulevard because my son had taken my headphones, and there's a protest going on down there. And it is the first time in my entire 22 years that I have spent in Los Angeles where I have seen Black people, white people, Latinos, and Asians in the middle of Sunset Boulevard protesting peacefully. I've never seen that for any single other issue. So when we talk about being the pupil of the eye, when we talk about, as Baha'u'llah says, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice, and I put that in the context of what these words mean, I'm real clear that I have to hold myself accountable every single day for the choices that I make.
Yeah. Thank you. And talking about those choices that you make, they're very evident on BahaiTeachings.org. I mean, and for those of you who follow the articles that are published, those are the choices that Liz does make on a daily basis and the content that she seeks.
I'll say sometimes. Sometimes.
You try. So, Marjan, tell us your thoughts.
Sure. So I am on a learning path, and being in Atlanta, I feel like there's no excuse being surrounded by wonderful historical Black colleges and universities around us, having such a large population of African Americans living in Atlanta, that there is no reason that when we're looking for any kind of whether to invest or whether to find someone to do any kind of a work or hire a contractor or anything, that we cannot find someone in the Black community to do that work. There's just so much qualified work in here in Atlanta. So for me, I have made the conscious decision that in every decision that if anything that I want to do, that I put it out there to interview people, that I make sure that there is a diverse group, but majority African Americans that I choose to work with in the day-to-day work that I'm doing. So that's one of the personal things that I have decided to do in my work. And we're blessed to live in this community that there's so much. So there's absolutely zero reason for anyone not to have that opportunity in Atlanta. So that's one of the examples I can say. So I can say that the building that we're building on Edgewood Avenue, that we gave out bids to 5 different contractors. And I'm proud to say that the contracting company that we hired is called Ujamaa, and they are 100% Black owned construction group. And they were super qualified. We interviewed quite a bit. And one of the interviews questions that I made is, what is the diversity in your community, in your program or in your business? And a lot of them have a hard time answering that. And so when I gave them a little talk and I said, thank you for your time, but you're not a good fit for my work. So, so that's just something that I'm personally endeavoring in that path.
Yeah. I mean, every financial decision we make leaves a trace behind. So you can choose what you want that trace to be. PJ.
Yeah, this is such a rich conversation so far. My mind's going in many directions, but the thought that's coming to mind right now is the reason that I'm a Baha'i, why I'm here today, is because a white superintendent in the 1950s in Falmouth, Massachusetts, made an intentional effort to reach out to my grandfather, who was a Black immigrant from the Cape Verde Islands. And this superintendent was a Baha'i. And so he had apparently read this Advent of Divine Justice, and knew his role was really to befriend and transcend the race line. Now my grandparents had become Baha'is, but many of my uncles did. And then I was also thinking about this statement. Some of you guys know the work of Dr. Joy DeGruy, and I was watching her talk once, and she said something that's really stuck with me. She said, racism's greatest tool is proximity. And so as you think more about that, it really gets this idea of segregation and separation. And so I was thinking about how, there's sort of these very clear material aspects of segregation and separation in terms of access to resources and opportunities that have led to incredible inequities. But then there's also this aspect of segregation that is psychological, right? That starts to unfold in our minds, especially the victims of racism, sort of a dehumanizing, delegitimizing effect over time that sort of makes you less than the superior race. So that's one aspect. But then the more profound and disturbing aspect is the spiritual aspect of separation and segregation. And that's really the separation from our own heart, from what makes us actually humans. And so I think then, part of the physical separation is that it breeds ignorance and fear, which sort of reinforces these walls of prejudice, and it's sort of a self-perpetuating. That's why it's a very effective tactic. So then it's actually quite important and quite revolutionary to work at the level of heart, to actually transcend the race lines. And I think that's kind of what The Guardian, or one of the aspects of what The Guardian is saying in this statement, is to be very intentional about the types of relationships that you make and how you make them. And so I think, in my personal life, that's related similar to what others have said about the neighborhood I've chosen to live in. And then I'm part of sort of the Baha'i community building efforts in this neighborhood that I'm in, that was predominantly Black, but because of gentrification in DC is very mixed, which is good because we do want to have interracial community, but trying to really see what does it look like to build community where people in a neighborhood actually see themselves as protagonists of change, as champions of justice. And then I think one other thought was this idea of participation. So I think oftentimes participation maybe can be viewed as a spectrum, that we're trying to create environments where people's hearts can evolve and change so that they see themselves as champions of racial justice and unity. And that we recognize that nobody really knows how to solve this problem. Certain people are much more advanced because of their experience. But if we're walking this path of service together, it's a wide path. It accommodates everyone. It accommodates different paces and strides. And we really are all trying to help each other walk this path towards racial justice and unity.
Yeah, thank you. And, for many of our viewers who are watching this, and you hear us talk about the guardian of the Baha'i faith, and you're probably wondering, who is the guardian of the Baha'i faith? And I'll just tell you very quickly that the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith is Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah passed away in 1892. And when he passed away, he designated his son, Abdul Baha, as the center of the faith. And Abdul Baha actually traveled to the US and spent about 9 months traveling and going to major cities in this country. And then when Abdul Baha passed away, he designated his grandson, Shoaib Effendi, as the guardian of the Baha'i faith. And then in 1963, the first elected global governing body came about, called the Universal House of Justice, which in our most holy book, it was basically established that this will happen in time. And then since then, the Universal House of Justice, which is elected by the Baha'is of the world every 5 years, is in charge of, is a supreme governing body of the Baha'i faith. And we also have local spiritual assemblies that are responsible for the Baha'i affairs in that town. We also have national spiritual assemblies that are responsible for the affairs of the Baha'i faith in every country. So this framework, this quote that we started this conversation with, gives specific responsibilities to the white Americans and the Black Americans. And so here's the question I have, and I'm going to ask Marjan and Leili, that what does it mean to give up your inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority? What does that mean to you? Whoever wants to go first.
Okay, where shall I go?
Go for it, Leili.
I don't know what it means, because it's a new day every day, and I make new mistakes every day. I had a friend years ago who had on the cover of his notebook a sticker that said, "Racism is a disease. Getting sick was not our fault, but getting well is our responsibility." And that's really stuck with me, because I think white people get all up in their feelings about, like, the worst thing you can call a white person is racist. Like, get over it. We all have been sickened by this disease. We were told very clearly in that letter that Anthony read the quotation from, The Advent of Divine Justice, that this is the case. And in fact, it's even heavier than that. Abdu'l-Baha said that if we do not take up this issue of white and Black, blood will run in the streets. He talked about that in 1912 when he traveled to North America. So, I think that the unconscious sense of superiority it's in the water. And although that makes me, ill to think of it, it has to be faced, and it has to be rooted out. Now, I think one thing that helps with that is loving, genuine, sustained friendships and, connections that last over decades, like I have with some of the people here in the squares. This love is an incentive to keep vigilant about that work, but I would never say that I've arrived anywhere, I've achieved anything. I just have to keep trying it every day and be aware and not be defensive when that thing comes out, but rather fix it and get better as I go.
Yeah, thank you. Marjan.
So for me, I've learned that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So every day I go with a posture of complete humility, to realize that I don't know anything. So I started by educating myself. Like yourself, I was born in Iran. So I did not learn the American history. I'm not familiar. So I started reading. I started watching movies. I started really educating myself. I started creating those bonds of friendship that are true, genuine, and heartfelt. And I started having conversation with my friends that I could ask questions, and some of you are on the panel, that I that I feel safe and comfortable, that I can ask those uncomfortable questions. And I learned to accept the moments that I am uncomfortable, extreme uncomfortable sometimes, with some of the reality that is that I am seeing. So all of this is, I think, once you put yourself in that field that you're in it and you want to learn, there is the spiritual learning, and then there's the secular learning. There is the humility that it has to come in it. There is, I make a lot of mistakes. I think a lot of people are so afraid of making mistakes, but I have learned that as soon as I realized I said something wrong, or as soon as I realized my behavior wasn't really, I didn't mean it, but it just came out, I apologize, but I don't expect them to accept it or validate it or anything. I just want to say, I'm sorry. And I leave it at that, And so I'm learning, but I'm just sharing some of my learning experience as far as how to put away that inherent superiority and try to leave that behind. And it comes out and I pick it up again and try to redirect myself again.
I mean, the Universal House of Justice reminds us about the mode of learning. And I think that the patience that the Guardian talks about is about the fact that, that mode of learning, requires patience, and it takes time for us to really get it. And I know, and I'm so grateful that I get to work with Liz, and I've learned so much from her and from other friends, just because of the fact that, especially, I think that not having been born in this country, I feel like I actually have a bigger responsibility. There's a lot more challenging at times to understand the sensitivities that often, as white people, we may not be cognizant of. So I'll ask also the flip side of this question from Eric. How do you talk to white people about this and their responsibility?
Well, I have very high expectations of my friends. And so I talk to them very frankly and honestly about it. And those of you who are on this call who have been in conversations with me know that I do that. One way that I try to help my friends kind of understand their role is I often tell them that if they have not really seen examples of what it means to, as the Guardian asked them to do, is to have a revolutionary change in their attitude toward their fellow Black citizens. I tell them to get some heroes, some new heroes, because this country has always had people of different hues that have fought for racial justice. And so I think that what we have to realize is that, we're not the first to try this. We won't be the last, but, there are a number of Baha'i scholars who have talked about the other tradition of American race relations. And I think we have to acknowledge that we have had a tradition of people joining together and standing up for one another. And as we began to reflect on that, I think that we have to also understand that a lot of that history has been hidden from us, which gets to that issue that I think, Leili brings up. And I want to share a quote with you from Abdul-Baha. Abdul-Baha, who was the son of Baha'u'llah and who is in the Baha'i faith, the perfect exemplar of what it means to be a Baha'i, says this. He says, "Do not be satisfied until each one with whom you are concerned is to you as a member of your family. Regard each one either as a father or as a brother or as a sister or as a mother or as a child. If you can attain to this, your difficulties will vanish and you will know what to do." One of the reasons I'm drawn to that quote is because it doesn't give us this one canned answer to the issue, but it says to me and infers that relationships breed creativity. You think about what you do for people that you love. You think about what you would do for your mother or your father or your child, and how creative you get when they are experiencing tribulation or difficulty. And if we are able to attain that level of relationship, we would refuse to let our brothers and sisters get choked out in the street. Yeah. There are certain things that you don't let happen to people that you love. And so I think that, I think PJ brought it up, this issue of proximity. One of the ways that this stuff is allowed to continue to go on is because our nearness to one another has been assaulted. We've been divided racially, we've been divided socioeconomically, and we're in these communities a lot of times that have a tendency to be segregated. That's not by chance. And so I think that, when Liz brings up the fact that she walked out in that street and she saw the human family interacting, I think that that's going to be one of the greatest remedies for this, because if we're not in each other's homes, at each other's dinner tables, sharing space together, we can't hear each other's stories. And stories have a phenomenal power to create and destroy a worldview. And so if we're not in close proximity to one another and developing the love that we need for one another, we're not going to be willing to sacrifice and stand up for one another and guide our actions in the proper direction to attain justice and unity on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Eric. PJ, would you like to add anything?
Do I? So many thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, what Eric made me think about is this quote from the writings of Baha'u'llah, where he says that the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity. And so I think there's this intimate relationship between these two profound spiritual principles that we don't fully understand. And they're both things that we operate by and also things that we strive for. And so I think what we're really learning about is how to become something new, become something different right now. It feels like there's these two questions in my mind of who are we and who are we becoming? And I think the question of who are we really gets at what Anthony was describing before about the importance of history and really knowing how we got to where we are, what allowed for this a really distorted social life to emerge in America. And then, you know, the Baha'i writings talk about racism and what's happening in America as a deep spiritual disorder. So then somehow there needs to be some kind of higher purpose, power, idea that we can align with that will help us become something new and different. And so then this question of the oneness of humanity comes to the fore. It doesn't seem like we can really move out of the race bind, this sort of structures that were developed to oppress. That's the purpose of them. That's why they evolved over the last 4 or 5 centuries. So I think there's in this moment a desire to really understand how we got here, and part of that is also going back into our racial categories. But then the oneness of humanity is also a source of our liberation. It actually frees us from this bind that has oppressed us, and it's almost like a catch-22. How do you let go of something that has become so ingrained in your identity that was also a source of your oppression, but then use this idea of the oneness of humanity and seeking justice as the foundation by which you move towards that oneness, as a tool by which we can take our next step in our collective maturation as a country, and really transcend the divisions that have existed so profoundly. I mean, it's a complex question. We're exploring it, but I think the question of the oneness of humanity has to be at the forefront, not in terms of a simple slogan or an outburst of emotional idea, but as sort of the profound implications that it has for social structures built on reciprocity and cooperation rather than on conflict and contention that breeds othering and sort of permutations of us and them and a limited seeking of resources.
That's a great point. I mean, I think often we're forgetting the joy and the spiritual implications, almost can call them spiritual rewards of this nation tackling this issue, and the unity that will come as a result of having done that, which will allow the spiritual destiny of this country to unfold. And again, for viewers, Baha'i faith is a religion that came about over 100 years ago in the Middle East, where all major religions have come from. Over 100 years ago, we were told that America has a spiritual destiny. But this spiritual destiny is not just going to come about. This spiritual destiny, this important designation that this country has, I think, unless that we have tackled this biggest challenge that we've been told is America's most challenging issue. I'd like to go to Makeena, and Liz, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I found myself thinking actually about the work that Makeena does, the work that Anthony does in schools, that Mike does with parents, and even I think you know, Payam, what you see working in Silicon Valley, I witness in journalism, is that I think that it's so critical for us to recognize that the inherent sense of superiority that shows up is not just a one-on-one kind of thing. It's in the systems. You know, it is
absolutely.
You know, so I know that every day when all y'all show up to work, you know, and you do the things that you do, you are grappling with a system that is steeped in an inherent sense of superiority. And so there is that part of, you know, I'll be transparent. Leili has been my best friend since I was 19. You know, she was hands down the first, you know, white woman that I could say was my best friend. And it was because I could let go of that sense of any sort of suspicion, because I knew she was about it. I knew that she was not playing when it came to racial justice. I knew that she would go to bat for me. I knew that, you know, when Marjan talked about that marathon, like Black folks, frankly, were tired of running. We've been running for hundreds of years, and we need people who will step up and say, y'all don't have to run anymore. Because we got this, we're handling this, and we're going to take care of it. And we are going to walk this path with you so that your children, you don't have to be scared when your son walks out the door that he's going to be killed, or that your grandson, you know, you don't have to whiten your name on a resume. And all of these things that Black folks do. You know, you don't have to be worried when you're going to look for a therapist that they're going to think the pathology is actually that you're Black. All of these things that are systems. And so when the good that has done me over the years, to know that I have someone all the way across the country who I know had moved intentionally into a Black neighborhood, and I'm putting you on blast, Leili. Family moved intentionally into a Black neighborhood. Her family has intentionally held gatherings in their home for decades where they are deliberate about ensuring that diverse people are there, deliberate about ensuring that African Americans are welcome there, deliberate about the business choices that they make. Like that's it's, to me, that is what has enabled me to recognize that I don't have to be suspicious, because I see the sense of, I have that sense of possibility because of that friendship. But I also know that she's doing the work to ensure that in all the places, not just our friendship, that she's about racial justice and unity.
Thank you, Liz. And the question I was just going to ask Makeena was, often we hear people saying that I'm not racist, but. And I mean, I hear that, I'm sure you hear that a lot more often. And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so for me, and I think for many people, like if you have read or just like even been thinking about racism as a system and culture, like I think a lot at the level of culture, if we live in, or if you're a fish in the sea and the sea is polluted, you breathe, or I guess do fish breathe, whatever, you bring in that whatever is in the water. And it's not a matter of personal choice. It's not a matter of, oh, like I want to be this way. Like if the system itself is contaminated, you therefore just are. And so I feel like there's this conversation that, and I think it can be, if we're not careful, it can be kind of like people feel very frozen in that, like that they can't do anything to become perfect. But it's like humans have that in many realms of our life. Like we know no one's perfect, but we still strive for excellence. And I think the same goes for this. So like, even though that we know the system is a way, and that even we may not in our own personal lives ever see, you know, the amelioration of racism, considering that it's in so many different systems and sectors of our lives, just recognizing that although it is in the air and we breathe that air, that we still can work for it. I think, and like for the amelioration of racism, I think that that's really key. So when you make it less personal, like it's not about you, this is a moment in the reality of our society right now. And so therefore, there is no one who can be like, I'm not racist, especially if you're of the oppressing group. You get, like, you don't get to just decide that you're not away. It's about like how you choose to then move, considering you know where you are positioned in society. So I think that that's usually my thinking for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you. My next question is for Anthony and Michael. Going back to the framework and the quote from Shoaib Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith. He talks about the responsibilities of the whites and the blacks. And I guess the question I have is that how can you be ready to forget the past and not be suspicious when there is no justice yet, and when the past still dictating the present? Anthony.
All right, sorry.
That's all right.
So, I mean, I look at it like this. When I look at this whole idea of suspicion, you know, Liz alluded to it earlier in terms of her relationship with Leili. When she realized that Leili was an ally, right? It helped for her to ease those suspicions. I look at it like this as well, right? Right now with the pandemic going on, all of us are like wearing these masks, right? Personal protective equipment. And we're wearing those masks to prevent ourselves or to fortify ourselves from something that could potentially harm us. Now that doesn't mean that we dislike the person in front, that we hate them, that kind of thing. But what it does mean is that, you know, there is a potential for something, you know, to happen. And so, you know, when I look at Black people's experience in America, we have to understand how white supremacy operates in our society, and we have to be able to be ready. And it's not necessarily suspicion. I classify it as readiness. We have to be ready so that we could see it, name it, we detect it and name it, and then contest it. A lot of times what happens is, because we're fed all of these slogans and all of these ideals that don't match our reality and experience, even some Black people ourselves walk into situations thinking that we should be treated one way and then we're treated another way, and then it knocks us out the box. You see, we get mad, or we say, I'm leaving this congregation, or I'm not participating in this thing. Or we, you know, are hurt, you know, different things happen. And so I think it's important that there is this awareness in the environments that we go in as Black people, that of how white supremacy may operate in that space. All right. So because a lot of times what happens as well is that, you know, we've been conditioned to assimilate in certain ways in spaces. Right. And so I think at all times we have to be aware of what's happening, but don't allow that awareness to veil us from relationships that we could build with folk. Right. And so that's how I see that. We have to be aware. We have to be vigilant and conscious, but don't allow those things to not give people an opportunity to show us who they are.
Yeah. Thank you. Michael.
Well, I mean, of course, I agree with what Anthony has said. And what I would add is that for me, I have a goal in life. I know where I want to go. I am aware that my purpose is to serve humankind. That's what I'm doing. Now, if someone can help me with that, then that's wonderful. But if they can't help me with that, that's still my goal. You see, so I will look around at the things, at the resources that I have, and I will use the tools that are most effective for what I'm trying to accomplish. But what I won't let happen is that because I don't find things exactly as they are, that I will change my goal. Our purpose as human beings is to serve one another. And suppose I get equality and I'm still thinking about, okay, now I got mine. That's not the end. The end is everybody comes to understand that we're here to serve each other. Some of us are farther away from understanding that than others. But but none of us are there. So what I seek to do is figure out my goal and continue to head towards that goal. On that journey, I have found people that would give me their heart, but if I asked them to call themselves racist, they'd run out the room like they were on fire. But that's their psychology. You see, so what I'm going to do is focus on what can we do together, as was so well said, because we're all in this fish tank and it's sick.
Yeah.
What can we do to create pockets of wellness within this fish tank? And my method of doing that is to serve and to create models of service that people find attractive and want to replicate, and hence create other models for people to engage each other. So it's really about me focusing. And as a matter of fact, if we read more about this advent of divine justice, what we're talking about now, there is not only the part about race unity, but there's also the part about character.
Yes.
Everybody's character. You see, it's a dual crusade, as we all know. It's everybody's job to get better. And so I'm going to focus on getting better and creating models that other people who are in the space where they can try and follow that will have something to hold on to.
Thank you, Michael. And by the way, everything that you heard Michael saying, he's living it. If you don't know, please look up Parent University. So you get a sense for the work he's doing and impacting the community he's part of. This is a phenomenal project. Eric, I've got a question, and you can add whatever you want to say to this one. And that is, I've heard that often Black people say that it's not my job to educate you. And why is that? Why is it that Black people, they're tired of it, that they want to say that go educate yourself, but don't ask me to educate you? Help me understand that.
Well, so as not to speak for for all Black people on the planet, I think that, one of the principal teachings of the Baha'i faith is the individual investigation of truth. And we have been, all of us have been liberated from having to survive and be sustained off the truth of any individual. So I think one of, when I say that to folks, I say that because I know that at least in the Baha'i community, everyone has access to our writings. Now, that's not to say that I won't share with someone, what I know and what I've learned. But, when Baha'u'llah talks about justice, an aspect of justice is being able to see through your own eyes and do the work of that you have to do to transform yourself around this issue. And I think that, as was mentioned, Black folks are tired because we have been in this race a long time. We didn't just start, or just come to this realization that that these things are very present in America. We've been living them. We've been suffering under the yoke of them, and we have been consistently telling people that these things are happening to us. And so, so I think that I also think that part of a community's learning, and I'll use my kids as an example. If I do everything for my children, then they don't learn. And so I also think that I think that there are I don't think that that's like a mono-dimensional. I don't want to give you a mono-dimensional response, because I believe that at this point every Black person is entitled to a little bit of rest. and that, you know, I'm a firm believer of that. You know, I believe that we have carried this for a long time. And I think that one of the things in this passage that we started off with is that the effort is a co-responding effort. You know, it has to be reciprocal, and you know, kind of piggybacking on what you know, Brother Anthony was saying, is that, you know, if when people say, you know, forget the past, then I'll ask them, you know, how far back do you want me to start forgetting? You want me to start forgetting last week when George Floyd was killed, or how far back do you want me to keep going, or yesterday, or you know, how, you know, because I think that we should not be, you know, we should not carry we should not be naive about where we live. You know, it literally is dangerous day to day for Black people in this country. And so we you know, we've been dealing with this information for a long time, and that is another reason why the relationship has to be reciprocal. Like, there is one thing for me to be sharing space with someone who, you know, like Liz says, I know that they're with me. They've been standing arm in arm with me for a year. But I think that there's another thing when the conversation is such that it is just drawing all of the energy out of me and not feeding me back at the same time. And we have to be mindful, because our mental health is at stake as well. You know, high blood pressure, all these other things, you know. And so I think that we have to be mindful to not, you know, I told my wife the other day, or today, is that, you know, after this weekend, I think I'm going to take some time to not talk about this to everybody that calls me on the phone. And I think we're entitled to a little bit of rest.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I'm to be cognizant of time, we have about 10 minutes, and there are a few questions from the audience that I will just ask different individuals, but just, you know, one answer for each, I think will suffice. So the first question, I'm going to go to PJ. This is Karen, and Karen is saying, we have moved into a mixed neighborhood. What deliberate steps can my family take to show our Black and brown neighbors that we are genuine allies? We started to do some things, but then the pandemic hit, and a few loving emojis follow.
Yeah. I'm thinking, like, there's this one line that's running through my head is that intention bestows capacity and action draws confirmation. And that the more we do, the more we learn. So I think if you have the intention, you just have to act on it, and really do it in a spirit of learning. Like, part of learning is reflection. So you act and you reflect. And so I think if there's, and I think obviously, like this, there's one aspect is your spirit. And I think that prayer can also help purify your spirit, and prepare you to do this important work. But also I think education is another piece. So if you have questions about really about this, I think educating oneself about Black culture and Black history, preparing yourself to have conversations with people of different races, I think is an important part of the process too.
Awesome, thank you. And for next question, I'm going to go to Anthony. Please speak on how white and Black individuals can educate themselves outside of the mainstream social agenda.
And this is kind of related to what PJ was sharing in terms of, you know, what can happen in a neighborhood, for example. I live in South Gwinnett County, which is about 15 miles outside of Atlanta. And it's a suburban community. And so it just as a concrete example of what can be done outside of these. So for example, we have this mass mobilization around the world, right? You see people in the streets marching, protesting, and that kind of thing. And that's kind of the go-to that people, you know, and it serves its purpose, right? It raises awareness, it mobilizes people but there's a difference between mobilization and organization, right? And so outside of those mainstream spaces is an opportunity to organize in different types of ways. And so to your question, Payam, and also to the question that was raised earlier, there was a Baha'i family in my community. They live, the neighborhood they live in, mixed community, but predominantly white community. And there was some discussion on the discussion board about the protests and the various things going on across the country. And so the family decided and said, hey, let's come together, right, in a social distance gathering in the driveway. And they did this on Sunday. And there were about over 20 people at this gathering discussing the current moment, talking about institutionalized racism, having discussions with people that they've never had these types of discussions with before. What struck me was there was a pastor in the group. He was talking about the neighborhood that he grew up in, and he was saying that this was the first time that he had ever been in a circle with Black people in that way, discussing these types of issues. And so the possibilities and opportunities are rich and ripe right now for these discussions. And what came out of that, which is very, very powerful, was that the neighbors said, hey, we need to do this more often. And we need to add a component to this, a children's component, where we're re-educating our children so that they're learning, about anti-racism. They're learning true history. They're learning about the things that'll be necessary to build a better world. And so they're going to be meeting bi-weekly to do this work. And so lo and behold, it inspired me. I said, hey, can I take a picture of this group? I took a picture of that group. In my neighborhood, we have a Facebook group. And so, sometimes you got to give people permission to let them know it's okay. I said, look at this picture, right? Now, out of this group, 20 some odd people, only 3 African Americans, everyone else was white. Which is typically that does not happen. You have a discussion on race, you got Black folk there, white folk are there. You sometimes trying to convince them that there is a problem. Every now and then you do get folk there that are in line with the conversation. But either way, so anyway, we're going to have a gathering here on Sunday in my neighborhood, and so we already have about 7.
Awesome.
So what I'm saying is that this is a concrete example and a way to engage with our communities in a way that can lead to some ongoing organization. And as Makeena was saying, being able to direct this energy towards something that does not dissipate, but continues for sustained action.
Yeah. Okay, we got a couple more, and then we'll do 30 seconds each for each of these responses. We can get through them. This is from Brett Smith. Question for the panel, but we're just going to give him one answer. What are your thoughts about participating in the types of demonstrations we are seeing these days in response to the killing of George Floyd? Leili.
I mean, this is important and necessary. It's people's spiritual response to what's going on. I mean, I don't know that I totally get the question. Like, am I meant to make a judgment on whether people should do it or not? Like they're
I think the question, the individual is really asking that, as a Baha'i, is it okay to participate in demonstrations?
Look, I'm not going to say what people should do or not do. Sure. All I know is that there's an element to this question that it gets me a little bit heated, because I think sometimes there's a misnomer about the Baha'i attitude to social change. Abdu'l-Baha was a radical. He was a radical. And he did things when he came to the US. He was giving a talk at a hotel. They wouldn't let Black folks into the hotel because it was a segregated hotel. He said, wrap it up. I'm not giving the talk. We're out of here. We're going somewhere where all of my brothers and sisters are welcome. He invited Louis Gregory, who was a lawyer and an early Baha'i, African-American Baha'i, to drop something off at the home of wealthy white Baha'is at a banquet. And he said, bring a chair for Mr. Gregory. And he sat Mr. Gregory at the seat of honor in this extremely wealthy elite. It was shocking. It was radical. And there are many more that I can't say, but I'm just saying as a general principle that Abdu'l-Baha gave us a model of uncompromising, persistent, outspoken, yes, unifying action. So, you know, I can't say more about it than that. That's my guide. And you decide, given your local circumstances, what the tenor of the gathering is, and you know what you think you need to do. But you know, to say that, oh, we have to be mute, and that peaceful somehow means that we are silent and that we don't participate in this worldwide movement, I don't think so.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go to just one final comment and then to one final question I have for you. And Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, at a talk over a century ago shared with us that Baha'u'llah once compared the colored people to the black people of the eye surrounded by the white. In this black people, you see the reflection of that which is before it. And through it, the light of the spirit shines forth. And there's so many stories of Abdu'l-Baha during his travels in the US and the love that he showed to African Americans. He was teaching us something about unity. And the actions he took to bring about that love, he promoted interracial marriages. And we're talking about over 100 years ago. And he promoted racial justice and oneness of humanity. He was an example that we're all trying to emulate. Abdu'l-Baha was all about action. And we know that. Anyone who reads the history of the Baha'i faith knows that Abdu'l-Baha was all about action. So the question, I think, for us is that, what now? What should we do? How should we participate? What gives us hope? And how should that hope translate into action? And there are four people I'm going to go to, and we'll start with Marjan, and then we will go to Makeena, Michael, and Liz. So Marjan, what gives you hope, and how will you translate that into action?
What gives me hope is the teachings and the guidance in the Baha'i writings that we have, really. For me, also what gives me hope is to, as Liz said, to see all the different hues of humanity that we see during the protesting. So this is just and in every country. So this is a call from every nation, every community, for that they are seeking justice. And so that is, for me, is hopeful. For action, I think engaging in my community. I see that as my personal obligation to get involved in my community. And as Liz said, you know, so many of our brothers and sisters, Black brothers, are tired of running. And so this is the time for us to take that and also walk together and go move together, and also to listen. I think we have to listen. And I think for me, the action is I want to listen to my community and do the best I can to help.
Thank you. Makeena, 30 seconds.
Okay, quickly. I think what I would say gives me hope is I've been thinking a lot about my ancestors, and
oh, we lost Makeena.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Yes. The work that my ancestors have done is something that brings me inspiration. And then also like seeing other Black people just be resilient, like be having these conversations, like, but also taking care of their spiritual, mental, and emotional and physical, because all of it's interconnected selves. That's always really inspiring to me. Yeah, I think then like also something that makes me hopeful is also that even when people don't always know what to do, like seeing that people do feel concern as they build like those who aren't part of the Black community, seeing that they do feel concern as they build relationships with Black people that they love. Like that also inspires me and makes me feel hopeful. In terms of action, I really think it has to do with making this, and it's like kind of the same thing I was saying earlier, like in all the conversations I have, I feel like I'm thinking about it and like trying to encourage that in my friendships, like having that be the standard for the people who are around me. Just like, and starting to just like really understand how race is so relevant in so many different factors of what we talk about.
Yes, thank you. Michael.
Yes. You know, Baha'u'llah says, thy calamity is my providence. You know, I read the Cliff Notes, and I want to say to the audience that we win this. Mankind wins in the end. The hopelessness is useless. We win this. It'll be hard, but we'll win this. My action, we win this. I want to say that again. My action item is to continue to serve people. So what has happened is that this is all I want to do. And I see the eyes of those people who are uplifted, and that's all the motivation that I need to keep going to the victory that I know is coming. So it's a done deal.
Yeah, thank you, Liz.
What gives me hope? A statue of a slaver coming down in Bristol, England. People marching in France, Ghana, all over this world. 50,000 people showing up on the streets of Hollywood here on Sunday, all marching for racial justice, all calling out for this. That gives me hope. That's not the kind of thing, again, that we have seen that I've seen in my lifetime. Never. There is something that's different, and I think everyone recognizes it. There is something that is different in the air in this time, and that gives me hope. In terms of action, I think engaging as much as I can, given social distancing, with my neighbors around these issues, talking to folks about it. But I think also, you know, as a mother of 2 African-American boys, making sure that I'm healthy and showing up for them every day is absolutely critical. And in the work that I do, I think, you know, when you go to BahaiTeachings.org and you see the content that's there, and you recognize that, you know, as a team, we have a process that we go through of really thinking about how is our content relevant to the needs of the age, and how are we engaging ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to bringing real talk about this, you know, because again, there's unity is the principle around which everything in the Baha'i faith revolves, and that requires a lot of action on all of our parts. We're not exempt from that. So I remember that for myself all the time. So.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that, and I know so many of you are joining us from the East Coast, and the fact that you agreed to join this panel. And I know the last few days have been particularly difficult, and the fact that you gave your time to us really, truly means a lot. I love every one of you, and I know most of you. I've spent time with most of you, and I'm glad I can call you friends, and it's been really special to spend this time with you. And you know, one thing that Michael, you said that really will stay with me, that you know, you will go back and you'll continue to serve people, and that's really at the end what it's all about. So you are all, you know, truly an inspiration for all of us, and you provide a different framework to deal with just the issue of race in this country. And I'm hoping that this conversation will continue, not just amongst us, but amongst you know, everybody in this country, that there is potentially a way that we can bring healing to this nation, because on the other side of it, something amazing is waiting for all of us. Thank you so much, and I'm gonna have a few more words with our audience, and then we will end the evening. So tonight's evening will end with a talk that was pre-recorded, and it's by Masood Olafani. Masood is a good friend. He's an advocate for social justice, and he's the host of Baha'i Teachings podcast, America's Most Challenging Issue. And I think the talk that he gave on this subject, on the subject of race, is really a moving talk. And I think you will really all enjoy hearing it, and I hope that you will share it. I'm hoping that tonight's talk has been energizing to all of us by giving us hopefully the interest, the willingness to want to go out there, and for many of us, for especially the immigrants, the white folks, to go beyond just posting quotes in social media, and know that at the end of the day, it's about action. Like Michael said, to get out there and serve people, because that is what's going to make the world a better place. And in the Baha'i faith, there's a quote that tells us, "Let deeds, not words, be your adorning." And I think if there is any time ever that we have to make sure that these are adorning and not just words, this is probably one of those times. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending your evening with us. And I hope that we'll see you again during the next Baha'i Teachings live program that we will have. Here is Masood Alfani. Good night.
Hi. Yes, that's me. I was 7 years old the first time someone called me a nigger. There on the South Florida school playground of my youth. It was said with a disquieting sense of authority and privilege, free of the irony or sly wit of Black vernacular expressions, which quite often operate multivalently, meaning one thing in one context and something else in another. To the minds of some of my white classmates, it was a declarative statement, a branding, a blot, a summation of my worth. I had heard the word used before, mostly in the Roots miniseries that chronicles the lives of American writer Alex Haley's enslaved ancestors. My parents made my older brother and I watch it each night it aired in the fall of 1977, but that word had never been applied to me. And as my clenched fist split little Bobby's lip and bruised his cheek, I was filled with a deep and abiding sense of gratification that preserved my pride, but left my soul restless. You see, his physical pain didn't satiate my emotional pain. It only hid it beneath a thin veneer of ego. I was only just beginning to learn about the power of words, about their ability to hurt or to heal, and that some are laced with a potent toxicity, the effects of which can last a lifetime. You see, it's the rust on the blade that lingers long after the knife has been drawn from the wound. It poisons the blood and pollutes one's self-perception. I did not cry that day in front of my classmates. I would not give them the satisfaction of knowing they had hurt me. But when I got home and my mother pulled me close and tried to explain the ugliness of the world, an ugliness which she tried to shield me from but ultimately could not, I cried. I was too young to know that this was a conversation that all Black mothers and fathers have with their children, a lesson, a longing, a plea, a desperate attempt to stitch caution and resilience into their sons and daughters as they learn to survive in a society engineered in part to destroy them. And as I grew and learned about the perverse nature of racism, how it operates in both covert and overt ways, and how, like a cancerous malignancy, it works its way into every part of the society in which it takes root, I began to understand that what my parents were trying to teach me above all else was how to see. Vision. A cultivated ability to perceive both the objective and the subjective reality, to see beneath the surface of appearances, and to calibrate your actions based on that information, because, in a very real sense, as a Black person in America, your life depends on it. This realization was long before I ever heard the name Baha'u'llah or the Baha'i faith. Long before I understood that the faculty of sight represents a dual phenomenon, one outward and one inner. Long before I knew what Baha'u'llah meant when he said that the phenomenal world is a metaphor for the spiritual world. And long before I read this astonishing statement in the Baha'i writings that the Black body, this Black body, oscillating between points of safety and community on one hand, and destruction and degradation on the other, is nevertheless endowed with a spiritual capacity unique to this revelation, and independent of the abuse, the venom, and the vitriol that a sick and bewildered world would try to graft onto my being. O thou who hast an illumined heart, thou art even as the pupil of the eye, the very wellspring of the light. For God's loving rays have shed their light on your inmost being, and you have turned your face toward the threshold of your Lord. I had never heard of such a thing. In my formative years, when I was trying to craft a healthy sense of self, to combat the bigoted way the world saw me, I devoured the writings of leading Black artists and intellectuals. I identified with the gritty realism of Richard Wright and James Baldwin. I appreciated the astute cultural observations of Zora Neale Hurston and the mournful and celebratory poetry of County Cullen, Claude McKay, and Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. And no one will dare say eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. Little did Mr. Hughes know that when he first penned this moving poem in 1925, that some 15 years earlier, the leader of a just realized revelation, traveled to America from Palestine and demonstrated in a startling similar fashion the spiritual law of the oneness of mankind. On April 23rd, 1912, Abdu'l-Baha upended the conventions of segregation by insisting that a Black man named Louis Gregory, a distinguished graduate of Howard University Law School, occupy a seat of honor in the luncheon reception following his address at that same university in Washington, D.C. This simple but profoundly revolutionary act occurring some 43 years before Rosa Parks sit in on a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama, was a clarion call to the world, a trumpet blast through time declaring in clear and emphatic language that this is a new day. In this day, every man, regardless of his complexion or social standing, every man and every woman has a seat at the table. In every dispensation, the light of divine guidance has been focused upon one central theme in this wondrous revelation, this glorious century. The foundation of the faith of God and the distinguishing feature of his law is the consciousness of the oneness of mankind. As a multidisciplinary artist, I am always aware of the importance of sight every time I step into the studio or I'm in front of the camera. My ability to render an idea in sculptural form or to craft a character on stage is determined by it. But one of the key characteristics of bigotry and hate is its blindness, a crippling myopia of the soul that makes one first see a criminal in the hooded face of a young black male, a threat to nationalist purity in the immigrant, and a challenge to male dominance in the principle of the oneness and the equality of women and men. And an outsider in a 7-year-old boy on a school playground. They whose hearts have been warmed by the energizing influence of God's creative love cherish his creatures for his sake and recognize in every human face a sign of his reflected glory. This handsome, distinguished gentleman here is my great-great-grandfather. And for much of his life, prior to the Civil War, he labored on the cotton fields of South Carolina, from sunrise to sunset, for free, with no monetary value to pass down to succeeding generations, multiplied across generations. This resulted in a wealth gap between the races of staggering proportions. The average white household has accumulated wealth 7 times the average African-American household, a direct result of slavery, Jim Crow, discriminatory housing and hiring practices that we're still afflicted by to this day. I sometimes wonder how he saw himself in relation to the larger society. Did he know that despite the brutal circumstances of his life, that he nevertheless represented the pupil of the eye, the apparatus through which light enters the soul? In one of his most moving tablets, Baha'u'llah, the manifestation of God on earth and the revealer of an independent, divinely revealed religion, assumes the position of certitude in answer to a request for freedom by an enslaved African. Oh my God, since he hath asked this for his freedom, I call thee to witness at this moment, this servant, that I verily have set him free in thy path, liberated him in thy name, and lifted from his neck the shackles of certitude, that he may serve thee in the daytime and in the night season, whilst I pray that thou mayest never free mine own neck from the chain of thy certitude. This verily is my highest hope and my supreme aspiration. And to this, thou thyself art a mighty witness. As we all work individually in our own lives and collectively in communities to free ourselves of the stain of racism, to cast off the shackles of bigotry and injustice, and to labor voluntarily in the holy vineyard of true freedom and human dignity, let us join hands and lift our voices to sing of a purer version of freedom. Not one polluted by the vices of materialism and excessive individualism, but a freedom purified by God's love, by God's grace, by God's justice, by God's mercy, and by God's forgiveness. And then, and only then, will the timeless words of Dr. Martin Luther King ring out with a new truth. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied together forever in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. No man is an island unto himself, each man a piece of the continent, a part of the whole. And then he goes on towards the end to say, any man's death diminishes me, for I'm involved in mankind. Therefore never seek to know for whom that bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Thank you.